Story 7. Being a janitor at a high school isn't the most glamorous job, but I didn't mind it. The hours were steady, and the work was straightforward. I spent my nights cleaning classrooms, emptying trash cans, and making sure the hallways were tidy for the next day. The school had its fair share of teenage antics, but nothing too out of the ordinary until the graffiti started showing up. The first time I saw it was in one of the stairwells, a simple symbol scrawled in black marker. It looked like a triangle with a circle inside, not unlike some band logos I'd seen. I cleaned it off, thinking it was just a bit of teenage rebellion, but the next night there were more symbols, this time in the second floor hallway. They were different lines, dots, and other geometric shapes like someone was leaving a message, but I couldn't make sense of it. The graffiti kept appearing, each night more intricate than the last. I did my best to clean it off, but it was getting harder to keep up. The symbols were becoming more complex, and they seemed to be leading somewhere, a path through the school that I couldn't follow. I mentioned it to the security guard, but he just shrugged, saying it was probably just kids messing around. But then I saw the message. It was on the wall outside the gym, written in bold. Black letters, "Meet me at the gym tonight." It was clear. No symbols or codes, just a straightforward invitation. It made my skin crawl, the idea that someone was planning something at the school after hours. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I decided to investigate, to see if I could figure out who was behind the graffiti and what they were planning. I kept an eye on the gym that night, my mop and bucket nearby as an excuse to be there. The hours passed slowly, the school empty and silent. I heard the distant creak of old pipes and the occasional echo of footsteps, but nothing out of the ordinary. As midnight approached, I started to think I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a prank, a way for some students to spook the janitor. But then I heard a noise, a faint whisper coming from the gym. It was quiet, barely audible, but it was there. I crept closer, my heart racing as I reached the gym door. I peered through the small window in the door and saw a figure standing in the middle of the gymnasium. It was hard to make out any details. The lights were dim, and the figure was wearing a hooded jacket, but I could see them pacing back and forth, their hands gesturing as if they were talking to someone. I knew I should leave, call the security guard, and let him deal with it, but something made me stay. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the growing sense of unease that had been building all week. I decided to enter the gym, my keys jangling in my pocket as I unlocked the door. The figure stopped pacing as I stepped inside, their head turning to face me. I could feel their gaze, even though I couldn't see their eyes. The air in the gym felt colder, the echoes of my footsteps bouncing off the walls. I took a step forward, my voice shaking as I spoke. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to sound confident. The figure didn't answer, just stood there, silent and still. I took another step, my hand tightening around the handle of my mop. The gym felt vast, the dim lights casting eerie shadows across the floor. "Why did you write that message?" I asked, my voice growing louder. The figure moved suddenly, darting toward the far end of the gym. I felt a surge of panic, my instincts telling me to run, but I stood my ground. The figure disappeared into the darkness, the sound of their footsteps fading as they left the gym. I rushed to the exit, my heart pounding in my chest. The school felt like a maze, the hallways twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. I could hear distant whispers, like the walls themselves were talking, but I couldn't make out the words. I finally made it to the security office, bursting through the door to find the guard asleep at his desk. I shook him awake, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. He looked at me with bleary eyes, his expression one of disbelief. "You sure you didn't just imagine it?" he asked, yawning. I knew what I had seen, but I couldn't prove it. There were no cameras in the gym, and the graffiti was just symbols and random words. I felt a sense of helplessness, realizing that whatever was happening, I was on my own. The next day, I noticed more graffiti, this time in the teacher's lounge. It was the same symbol I'd seen in the stairwell, but it was larger, more elaborate. It felt like a warning, a message that something was coming, something I couldn't understand. I quit my job at the high school soon after, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The whispers in the gym, the hooded figure, and the coded messages were too much for me to handle. I never went back, and I never found out what was really happening in that old school, but the memory of that night in the gym would haunt me for years to come. Story 8. The small town had a reputation for being quiet and uneventful, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business, and the local diner served as the social hub. But recently, things had taken a dark turn. People had started disappearing, vanishing without a trace. It wasn't just a few isolated cases, it was a pattern, a chilling string of disappearances that had left the town on edge. As a freelance investigator, I was used to digging into mysteries, but this one had me stumped. There were no leads, no clues, just empty spaces where people used to be. I spent days interviewing locals, searching for anything that might give me a hint about what was happening. The more I asked, the more I realized that the townspeople were nervous, reluctant to talk about the disappearances, as if discussing them might bring bad luck. One day I found myself in an old bookstore on the outskirts of town. It was a dusty, cluttered place, with creaking wooden floors and shelves stacked with books from floor to ceiling. The owner was a reclusive man, always peering at customers from behind his glasses, as if he expected them to cause trouble. I was browsing through the shelves, hoping to find something that might connect the dots, when I noticed a small door at the back of the store. It was slightly ajar, revealing a dark room beyond. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slipped through the door, careful not to make any noise. The room was cramped, filled with boxes and old furniture, but what caught my eye was a pile of books in the corner. They were old, their covers worn and faded, but one stood out, a diary, bound in leather and fastened with a brass clasp. I opened the diary, my heart racing as I flipped through the pages. The handwriting was neat but hurried, as if the writer was in a rush to get their thoughts down. The entries were detailed, each one describing a person who had disappeared from the town. There were dates, times, and locations, all meticulously recorded. But what was even more disturbing were the hints at a secret society, a shadowy group that seemed to be operating behind the scenes. The diary mentioned strange meetings in the woods, hidden gatherings in abandoned buildings, and whispers of rituals that took place under the cover of night. The writer seemed to know more than they were letting on, their words carefully chosen to avoid revealing too much. But the sense of danger was palpable, a constant undercurrent in every entry. As I read further, I found references to symbols and signs, cryptic drawings that matched the ones I'd seen around town. The symbols were like a secret language, a code that only a select few could understand. The diary hinted at a larger conspiracy, something that went far beyond the simple disappearances I'd been investigating. I was so engrossed in the diary that I didn't hear the sound of footsteps behind me. The floor creaked, and I spun around, the diary clutched tightly in my hand. It was the bookstore owner, his eyes narrowed as he stared at me. "You're not supposed to be back here," he said, his voice low and threatening. I tried to play it cool, pretending I was just curious about the old books, but he wasn't buying it. He took a step closer, his hand reaching out as if to grab the diary from me. I backed away, my instincts telling me to run, but I didn't want to let go of the evidence I had found. "You need to leave," he said, his tone menacing. "This isn't your business." I knew I had to get out of there, but I couldn't just walk away. I needed the diary, the clues it contained, if I was going to solve the mystery of the disappearances. I decided to make a break for it, darting past the bookstore owner and racing toward the front of the store. He shouted after me, his voice echoing off the walls, but I didn't look back. I burst out of the bookstore and into the street, the diary tucked under my arm. The town was quiet, the sun setting behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the pavement. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest, not stopping until I reached my car. I knew I couldn't go back to the bookstore, not after what had happened. The owner was clearly hiding something, and I had a feeling he was connected to the secret society mentioned in the diary. I needed to find a safe place to read the rest of the entries, to piece together the clues and uncover the truth. I drove to a secluded spot on the outskirts of town, a place where I could read without being disturbed. As I flipped through the pages, the diary revealed more about the secret society, a group that had been operating in the town for decades, their activities hidden from prying eyes. The symbols, the meetings in the woods, the rituals, it was all part of a larger plan, one that seemed to revolve around the disappearances. The diary mentioned names, people who were part of the society, and I recognized a few of them from my interviews. It was clear that they were powerful, influential figures in the town, people who could make someone disappear without a trace. I felt a surge of fear, realizing that I was dealing with something far more dangerous than I had anticipated. I knew I couldn't go to the local authorities. The secret society had connections everywhere. I had to take matters into my own hands, to find a way to expose the truth without putting myself in danger. The diary was my only hope, my only weapon against the darkness that had taken hold of the town. I spent the night reading and taking notes, my mind racing with possibilities. The secret society had been operating in the shadows for too long, and I was determined to bring them to light. But as I pieced together the clues, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, that the secret society knew I had the diary and was coming to take it back. I didn't know who to trust or where to turn, but I knew one thing for sure: the diary was the key to unraveling the mystery of the disappearances, and I wasn't going to let it go without a fight. The small town had its secrets, and I was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. Story 9. House sitting for my friend seemed like an easy favor. She had a beautiful home on the edge of town, nestled in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by woods. The place had a cozy feel, with antique furniture and soft lighting that made it feel like a step back in time. She was going to be away for a week, and I was happy to keep an eye on things, feed her cat, and water her plants. But I never expected to stumble upon what I did in her basement. It was the third night of my stay, and I was making my way through the house, turning off the lights and checking the doors. Everything seemed normal, the cat curled up on the couch and the plants thriving in their spots by the windows. But as I passed by the basement door, I noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible through the crack. I was sure I had closed it earlier, but maybe I'd just forgotten. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the basement door, flicking on the light switch. The basement was large, with concrete floors and walls lined with shelves filled with boxes and old furniture. It was the kind of place where you stored things you didn't want to throw away but had no use for anymore. I stepped down the creaking wooden stairs, my footsteps echoing in the dimly lit space. As I explored, I noticed a corner of the basement that seemed darker than the rest. The light from the overhead bulb didn't quite reach it, casting it in shadow. I moved closer, my eyes adjusting to the dimness, and that's when I saw a trapdoor, hidden behind a stack of old crates. It was wooden, with a rusted metal handle, and it was slightly open, as if someone had recently used it. My heart raced as I lifted the trapdoor, the creak of the hinges sending a shiver down my spine. A narrow set of stairs led down into a pitch-black space below. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should leave it alone, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and descended the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. At the bottom, I found a makeshift laboratory. It was a small room, cramped and filled with old medical equipment, rusty surgical tools, glass beakers, and metal trays. There were workbenches along the walls, cluttered with papers and faded photographs. It looked like something out of a horror movie, a place where terrible things had happened. I picked up one of the photographs, holding it under the light of my phone. It showed a person strapped to a table, their eyes wide with fear. There were wires and tubes attached to their body, leading to strange machines in the background. The other photographs were similar, each one depicting a different person undergoing some kind of bizarre experiment. My stomach churned as I realized what I had stumbled upon. This wasn't just a hidden room, it was a secret lab, a place where someone had been conducting unethical experiments on people. I felt a surge of panic, wondering who had built this place and what had happened to the people in the photographs. I knew I needed to leave, to call the police and report what I had found, but I couldn't resist looking through the papers on the workbenches. They were covered in scribbled notes and diagrams detailing the experiments and the results. It was all technical jargon, but the general idea was clear: someone had been trying to manipulate human behavior to control the mind in ways that were unnatural. As I reached for another photograph, I heard a noise from above. It was faint, like the creak of a floorboard, but it was enough to make me freeze. I listened, my heart racing, as the sound grew louder, like someone was moving around in the basement. I knew I had to get out of there to escape before I was discovered, but the narrow staircase felt like a trap. I grabbed a few of the papers and photographs, shoving them into my pocket, and headed for the stairs. The creaking grew louder as I climbed, the footsteps approaching the trapdoor from above. I was almost at the top when the trapdoor swung open, a shadowy figure silhouetted against the light. I panicked, my mind racing with thoughts of being caught in this hidden lab. I stumbled backward, my foot slipping on the stairs, but I caught myself before I fell. The figure stood at the top of the stairs, blocking my escape. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of their body against the light from the basement. Without thinking, I lunged forward, pushing past the figure and scrambling out of the trapdoor. The basement was a blur as I ran for the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the figure chasing after me, their footsteps heavy and deliberate, but I didn't look back. I burst through the basement door and into the hallway, slamming it shut behind me. I knew I couldn't stay in the house, not after what I'd found and the danger I was in. I grabbed my keys and ran out the front door, my pulse racing as I sprinted to my car. As I drove away, I could still hear the footsteps in my mind, each step a reminder of the horrors I'd uncovered in that hidden laboratory. I called the police, telling them about the trapdoor and the strange lab in the basement. They said they would investigate, but I knew I couldn't go back to my friend's house. The images from the photographs, the old medical equipment, and the shadowy figure chasing me, it was all too much, too dangerous. I never spoke to my friend about it, never explained why I couldn't house sit for her again, but I knew one thing for sure: the hidden trapdoor in her basement was a doorway to something dark and sinister, and I was lucky to have escaped with my life.